What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the AT-ST, the All-Terrain Scout Transport. It was manufactured by Kuat Drive Yards, with instructions from the Imperial Department of Military Research to make a walker that would be similar to the AT-AT and AT-PT, but to be smaller and faster, while still being able to pack a punch. They were happy with the AT-AT, but obviously it would have a hard time with tighter spaces, and the AT-PT was doing just fine, but what they didn't like is that the legs were attached to the command center of this vehicle. And one of the first design improvements was to raise the cockpit above the legs and allow the head of the vehicle to swivel. This way those walker legs didn't have to turn completely around, but instead the top of the AT-ST could quickly turn its head left and right up to 240 degrees. It was 8.6 meters tall, or about 28 feet, making it taller than the AT-PT and a little more than a third of the height of the AT-AT. Let's go ahead and take a look at some cross sections, starting at the feet and working our way up. First, we see that each foot has a wide array of sensors. These provide the pilots in the cockpit with a ton of useful information, including the unevenness of the terrain, as well as the density. This information is worked into a computer system, which can calculate where the walker's next step should be. And another cool feature on the feet is that it has little cutting blades, which are excellent at cutting through anything in its path. Working our way up into the legs, we see a system of shock absorbers and even more sensors, which help make the calculations which keep this thing from falling over. We see the placement of several knee joints, which gave the AT-ST the particular movement that earned it the nickname the Chicken Walker. But if we look close at this front knee joint, we see that Kuat was clever in making sure that it was protected by a joint shield. These legs were connected, of course, to the drive engine. This motor used energy from a series of power cells. Unlike its larger brother, the AT-AT, this guy didn't have enough room to fit a full power generator, so instead it had to rely on individual power cells. These power cell canisters were inserted here on the side, and we see that it had a radiator for cooling and an exhaust port that was noticeably smaller than a Womp Rat. Above this, we have the Gyroscopic System, which is what allowed the AT-ST to move so fast through difficult terrain. These leg sensors, gyroscopic motors, and input from the human pilots were all calculated in this very large and very powerful locomotion computer. Located in the back of the AT-ST to try and keep it out of any direct enemy fire, this computer was smart enough to run the AT-ST by itself, but it also provided the pilots with a view screen and holo projectors to allow them to have a 360 view of the AT-ST, as well as its suggestions for movement across the battlefield. The pilot, though, of course, could override this feature and navigate the AT-ST himself if needed. To make sure the pilots were comfortable and able to operate in hot and muggy planets, up top here you had what was basically an air conditioning unit. And to make sure the pilot and gunner are protected, it had thick enough plate armor that it couldn't be damaged by blaster fire, and these viewports up here could close if needed, and then the pilot and gunner would operate the AT-ST using the holographic displays and other sensors. And of course, this thing had a ton of weapons. Up front was a double blaster cannon, on the side a twin blaster cannon, and on the other side a concussion grenade launcher. And in some variants, this grenade launcher could be swapped out for homing missiles. So we've said all the cool things about the AT-ST, but let's talk about some of its shortcomings. One is that because this vehicle is so top heavy, if for some reason the terrain became too unstable and this vehicle couldn't get sure enough footing, like say if there's a whole bunch of rolling logs that it's trying to walk over, it will of course fall over. We saw that its armor could also be crushed if a large enough force is applied to it. This is something that was actually replicated on Mythbusters if you want to check that out. But other weaknesses included taking out its locomotion computer, which could be more easily damaged if attacking the AT-ST from the rear. But some rebels would also focus on taking out the gyroscopic stabilizer. This made it so if the AT-ST tried to hit its top speed of 90 kilometers per hour or about 55 miles per hour, it would quickly lose its balance and fall to one side, making the escaping pilot and gunner very easy to pick off, or it either crashed into the ground with such force that its munitions and or power cells would go off, killing the crew inside and engulfing the AT-ST in a ball of flames. As for its history, the idea for the AT-ST was actually introduced during the Clone Wars. Rothana Heavy Engineering, the same company that brought us Republic walkers like the AT-TE and the AT-RT, was working on a walker that could bring a lot of firepower into the battlefield while still being quick and stable across different terrains. When the Republic became the Empire, Rothana Heavy Engineering continued their production, but most of the manufacturing was done on the planet Balmorra. Imperial commanders quickly fell in love with this vehicle, as its mobility and versatility allowed it to hunt down rebels in thick jungles, but also police the civilian population within a city. Later, during the Galactic Civil War, we saw them being used during the Battle of Hoth and during the Battle of Endor, the latter of which exposed some of the AT-ST's worst flaws. And this vehicle actually lives on after the fall of the Empire, as leftover AT-STs were used by both the New Republic and the Imperial Remnant forces. And that's where its history ends. But before you go, you definitely want to hear these cool facts and some behind the scenes stuff. There are a couple reasons to explain why Chewbacca was able to open up the hatch of an AT-ST, even though they were in the middle of combat. One, I think it's always important to remember that at the time of the Empire, we see that they were very arrogant and didn't expect to meet a lot of opposition when they were in battle. That being said, there's another theory that because the Empire is so human-centered, They weren't checking the AT-ST to make sure that it would be able to withstand the immense strength of the really odd species known as the Wookiees. It said that some of the concept art used for the AT-ST was actually put into the Revenge of the Sith comic adaptation, and some think that the AT-RT was close to some of the first drawings for the AT-ST. During the production of Empire Strikes Back, they filmed a whole bunch of scenes of the AT-ST on Hoth, but Lucas decided to focus more on the AT-AT, thinking that it was much more impressive on screen. And of course, ever since the Battle of Endor, people have fell in love with the AT-ST, and it's been in a ton of different video games. Well, that's it for the AT-ST. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdsLore, so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But more important than all that, remember, watch out for those trees, and the Force will be with you, always.